You wake up, check your phone, and suddenly the headlines are everywhere. US warships launch missiles into northern Nigeria. American troops deploying on Nigerian soil. President Donald Trump warning of more military action in West Africa. And if you're sitting anywhere on the African continent, you stop scrolling. Because this isn't Somalia. This isn't Iraq. This isn't some distant battlefield most Americans can't find on a map. This is Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, the continent's most populous nation, the political anchor of West Africa. So what exactly is happening? On Christmas Day, 2025, while families were celebrating across the world, US naval forces positioned in the Gulf of Guinea fired missile strikes into Sokoto State. Days later, Washington confirmed what many suspected. 200 American troops would be deployed to Nigeria. Officially, they were there for advisory and counterterrorism support. That's the official story. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody in Western media is asking loudly enough. Why now? For 16 years, northern Nigeria has been burning. Over 40,000 people killed, millions displaced, entire communities erased. Boko Haram, ISWAP, armed bandits, new extremist factions. This conflict did not start yesterday. So why did US missiles suddenly land on Nigerian soil in 2025? President Trump says it's about protecting Christians from genocide. The Nigerian government calls it a joint counterterrorism partnership. AFRICOM says both countries agreed. But when Nigerian officials were first asked about the Christmas Day strikes, there was confusion. Reports suggested Abuja was not formally notified before the missiles fell. Think about that carefully. A foreign military power conducting kinetic strikes inside Africa's most powerful country. And the public finding out through international news alerts. That's not just counterterrorism. That's sovereignty. And sovereignty is not a small issue. Because Nigeria is not just another African state struggling with instability. It is the strategic heart of West Africa. It sits on the Gulf of Guinea, a corridor that supplies global oil markets. It holds vast reserves of crude. It commands the largest population on the continent. And beneath its soil lies something even more valuable than oil in today's world: lithium. Yes, lithium. The mineral powering electric vehicles, the backbone of renewable energy storage, the silent engine of the global tech revolution. And where are many of Nigeria's richest lithium deposits located? In the north-central regions, in areas destabilized by insurgency, in zones where extremist groups operate, in territory that suddenly, conveniently, becomes a justification for foreign military presence. Coincidence? Maybe. But history teaches us to look twice when global powers move troops near natural resources. The war in northern Nigeria is complex, far more complex than a simple Christian versus Muslim narrative. Boko Haram has killed more Muslims than Christians. ISWAP attacks military bases filled with Muslim soldiers. Armed bandits kidnap entire villages regardless of religion. New militant groups enforce their own brutal interpretations of law on Muslim-majority communities. This is not a clean religious war. It is a layered security collapse, fueled by poverty, climate stress, weak governance, cross-border arms flow, and regional instability spilling over from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So when Washington frames this as stopping genocide, it simplifies a crisis that is anything but simple. And simplification is dangerous. Because when complex conflicts are reduced to emotional slogans, the real motivations often hide behind them. Here's another piece of timing that matters. Just months before the troop announcement, the United States lost its major drone base in Niger after the 2024 coup. Airbase 201 in Agadez, a $110 million. Cornerstone of American counterterrorism strategy in the Sahel was shut down. Over 1,000 US troops withdrawn. Washington needed a new foothold in West Africa. Nigeria suddenly becomes the perfect replacement. Large military, strategic coastline, ongoing insurgency, resource wealth. democratic government willing to cooperate. The chessboard shifted, and Nigeria moved into position. Now, the Pentagon says these 200 troops are temporary advisors, training support, intelligence cooperation. But history has a pattern. Vietnam began with advisors. Afghanistan began with a limited mission. Iraq began with targeted objectives. Temporary has a strange habit of becoming permanent. So before we move forward, we need to ask the deeper question. Is America entering Nigeria to solve Nigeria's crisis? Or is Nigeria becoming the next strategic outpost in a larger global competition that has very little to do with the people dying in Sokoto, Zamfara, or Kaduna? Because when superpowers move, they rarely move for just one reason. And what's unfolding in Nigeria might be much bigger than counterterrorism. Now let's strip away the headlines and get uncomfortable for a moment. Because if this was only about terrorism, the question would be simple. Which terrorists? Nigeria isn't fighting one enemy. It's fighting several wars at the same time. In the northeast, Boko Haram has been raging since 2009. Entire towns erased, schoolgirls kidnapped, military bases overrun. But even Boko Haram is no longer just Boko Haram. It fractured. One faction pledged loyalty to ISIS and rebranded itself as ISWAP, the Islamic State West Africa province. And here's what most international audiences don't realize. ISWAP is currently one of the most active ISIS affiliates on the planet. They don't just ambush villages. They target Nigerian military installations. They run coordinated operations. They've launched hundreds of attacks in a single year. Their strategy, known as Burn the Camps, focuses on storming fortified military bases and humiliating the Nigerian armed forces in direct confrontations. But here's the key detail. The US did not strike ISWAP. Instead, the Christmas Day missiles targeted a newer group operating in the northwest, Lakurawa. Most Nigerians hadn't even heard of Lakurawa until late 2024. They emerged quietly. Fighters drifting in from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. At first, they were welcomed by some local communities, desperate for protection from bandits. They drove out criminal gangs. They restored a fragile sense of order. And then they changed. They imposed strict religious codes. They taxed villages. They punished dissent. They executed civilians for refusing their version of Sharia law. In early February 2026, Lakurawa attacked 2 villages in Kwara State and massacred over 160 civilians in a single assault. 162 lives gone in hours. And yet, outside Nigeria, it barely registered. So yes, Lakurawa is brutal. Yes, they are dangerous. But they are not the largest insurgent force destabilizing Nigeria. ISWAP remains the more structured and territorially entrenched threat. Bandit networks across Zamfara and Kaduna have killed thousands through mass kidnappings and coordinated raids. These criminal syndicates control gold mines. They operate ransom economies worth billions of naira. And here's where the lines blur. Bandits collaborate with jihadists. Jihadists train criminals. Extremism merges with organized crime. Religion mixes with economics. Violence becomes industry. This is not a simple battlefield. So when President Trump frames the crisis as a Christian genocide, it creates a powerful emotional reaction. It mobilizes political bases. It simplifies messaging. But the data tells a more complicated story. Many victims of Boko Haram and ISWAP are Muslims. Entire Muslim villages have been slaughtered for resisting. Extremist control. Imams have been executed. Muslim soldiers ambushed and killed in mass numbers. The conflict is ideological, territorial, economic, not purely religious. That doesn't diminish Christian suffering. Churches have been attacked. Christian communities have endured horrific violence. But the framing matters, because when you frame a multi-layered insurgency as a clean religious genocide, you justify external intervention on moral grounds. you activate international outrage. You lower resistance to military escalation. Narratives shape policy. And while the world debates religion, something else is happening quietly beneath the surface. Northern Nigeria is not just conflict territory, it is mineral territory. Lithium deposits in Nasarawa, significant reserves in Plateau and Kaduna, high-grade concentrations that mining companies dream about. And who has been heavily investing in those regions? Chinese firms. Over the past few years, Chinese companies have partnered with Nigerian state governments to build lithium processing plants. They have moved aggressively into mining operations, infrastructure, extraction agreements. China does not wait. While Western governments debated human rights and governance conditions, Beijing built relationships. Now zoom out. The United States is in an economic Cold War with China. The battlefields are no longer just Taiwan or the South China Sea. They are supply chains, rare earth elements, battery minerals, clean energy dominance. Lithium is strategic. Without it, electric vehicle industries stall. Renewable energy transitions slow. Defense technology production weakens. And Nigeria holds one of the largest untapped lithium reserves in Africa. Suddenly, instability in northern Nigeria becomes more than a security issue. It becomes a strategic vulnerability in the global resource race. And just days ago, US lawmakers introduced legislation linking Nigerian religious violence with Chinese mining activities. Buried inside a religious freedom bill are provisions targeting Chinese mineral operations and alleged funding links to armed groups. That is not coincidence. That is competition. So now, we must ask a sharper question. Are American troops in Nigeria primarily there to defeat Lakurawa? Or are they positioning themselves inside a country that sits at the intersection of terrorism, energy supply, and critical mineral wealth? At a time when Washington is scrambling to counter Beijing's expansion across Africa? Because if this is about great power rivalry, then Nigeria is not just a partner. It is a prize. And prizes in global politics rarely come without pressure. But here's where the situation becomes even more sensitive. Because security partnerships are one thing. Permanent military footprints are another. When the Pentagon announced the deployment of 200 US troops to Nigeria, it described them as advisors. Temporary, limited, focused on intelligence and counterterrorism training. That language sounds familiar. It's the same language used in Vietnam, the same language used in Iraq, the same language used in Afghanistan. Advisors, temporary missions, limited objectives. History has shown how those words can evolve. Nigeria now faces a delicate balancing act. On one side, the country is overstretched. Its military is fighting insurgents in the northeast, bandits in the northwest, separatist tensions in the southeast, oil theft in the Niger Delta, equipment shortages, intelligence gaps, morale challenges. External support can look attractive. On the other side is sovereignty. And sovereignty is not abstract. It is the ability of a nation to control what happens within its borders, to decide when foreign forces operate, to approve military cooperation through transparent institutions, to ensure Parliament, not just executive offices, shapes security agreements. Here's the uncomfortable sequence that raised eyebrows. The United States publicly confirmed troop deployment before detailed Nigerian parliamentary debate occurred. The Pentagon spoke first. Abuja clarified afterward. That order matters, because perception shapes power. If the world sees Nigeria reacting to American announcements rather than jointly shaping them, the optics shift. The relationship begins to look less like equal partnership and more like strategic accommodation. Then came reports that US Special Forces units were assigned to support operations. Units designed for unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency, direct action. This is not routine classroom training. This is high-level operational capacity. Add to that reports of discussions around expanded drone operations and potential refueling infrastructure in northeastern Nigeria, and suddenly, the footprint begins to look less temporary. Now, zoom out again. In 2024, Niger's military government ordered US forces to leave its territory. The massive drone base in Agadez, once central to American Sahel strategy, was dismantled. Over 1,000 troops withdrawn. Years of infrastructure investment gone. Washington lost its strongest intelligence platform in the region almost overnight. Strategic planners do not leave vacuums unfilled. When one foothold closes, another opens. Nigeria, stable compared to coup-hit neighbors, becomes strategically attractive. But here is the deeper risk. If Nigeria becomes the new anchor for US operations in West Africa, it may also inherit the blowback. Extremist groups often frame foreign military presence as occupation. Recruitment propaganda intensifies. Anti-government narratives grow stronger. Local grievances get tied to global agendas. The fight shifts. Instead of government versus insurgents, it becomes government backed by foreign power versus resistance. And that reframing can change the battlefield dramatically. There is also the economic layer. If American strategic interest expands beyond counterterrorism into mineral supply security, oil infrastructure protection, and supply chain stabilization, the security mission may widen. Security for who? For villages or for extraction routes? Because once resource corridors become strategic assets, military protection often follows. And when foreign troops guard strategic assets, local communities can feel sidelined. This is not inevitable. It is possible. And possibility matters in geopolitics. Nigeria's leadership insists all cooperation respects sovereignty, that engagements are transparent, that operations are coordinated, but sovereignty is tested not in statements. It is tested in leverage. If tomorrow Nigeria decides it no longer wants foreign troops, can it enforce that decision without economic consequences? If US corporate interests request expanded security around lithium zones, can Abuja say no? If counterterrorism priorities diverge, if Washington prioritizes mineral-rich zones over civilian-heavy conflict areas, who decides the operational map? These are not theoretical questions. They are strategic ones. Because Nigeria is no small player. It is Africa's demographic giant. By 2050, it will be one of the most populous countries in the world. Its market size alone makes it globally significant. That gives Nigeria leverage. But leverage only works if used carefully. The danger is not cooperation itself. The danger is imbalance. If partnership becomes dependency, policy autonomy shrinks. If military presence becomes normalized, public oversight weakens. If strategic decisions happen behind closed doors, trust erodes. And trust is fragile in societies already strained by violence. Nigeria stands at a crossroads. One path strengthens its security forces while preserving institutional control. The other gradually embeds external power into its internal architecture. The difference between those paths may not be visible today, but history shows it becomes visible over time. And once lines are crossed, reversing them is far more difficult than crossing them. So where does this leave Nigeria? Caught between insurgency and influence, between security needs and sovereignty risks, between Beijing's checkbook and Washington's military muscle. Because make no mistake, this is no longer just about Lakurawa, or ISWAP, or bandits in Zamfara. This is about positioning. The 21st century scramble for Africa does not look like the 19th century. There are no colonial flags being planted, no formal declarations of empire. Instead, there are infrastructure loans, military agreements, mineral concessions, drone bases, security partnerships wrapped in humanitarian language. The tools changed. the objective did not. Control over supply chains, control over energy routes, control over strategic geography. Nigeria sits at the center of all three. It borders the Sahel, where coups have pushed Western forces out. It anchors the Gulf of Guinea, one of the world's most important oil corridors. And beneath its soil lies lithium that could power millions of electric vehicles. That combination makes Nigeria too important to ignore. So when President Trump speaks about protecting Christians, that message resonates deeply with certain audiences in America. It mobilizes voters. It frames intervention as moral duty. But moral narratives can coexist with strategic calculations. Washington understands something very clearly. The country that controls critical minerals controls the future of technology. The country that secures energy corridors influences global markets. The country that maintains forward military positions shapes regional security architecture. And Nigeria intersects all three arenas. But here is the part rarely discussed. Nigeria is not powerless in this equation. Unlike smaller Sahel states, Nigeria has demographic weight, economic scale, diplomatic, influence through ECOWAS, a military that, despite its challenges, remains one of the strongest in sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria can negotiate. It can define the terms of engagement. It can insist on parliamentary oversight. It can demand technology transfer, intelligence sharing equality, and clear exit timelines for foreign deployments. The question is not whether Nigeria should cooperate. The question is whether it will cooperate from a position of strength or from urgency. Because urgency leads to concessions, and concessions, once embedded into security agreements, are difficult to unwind. There is also the domestic dimension. Nigerians are watching. Civil society is watching. Regional neighbors are watching. If the perception grows that Abuja allowed foreign strikes without full transparency, trust erodes. If communities believe military partnerships are protecting minerals more than villages, resentment builds. And resentment is fuel. Extremist recruiters thrive on narratives of foreign intrusion. They weaponize optics. They exploit symbolism. A single miscalculated airstrike, a single civilian casualty attributed to foreign forces, a single viral image. That is sometimes all it takes to transform cooperation into controversy. So what happens next? Does the US presence remain limited and technical, focused strictly on intelligence and advisory roles? Or does it expand quietly? New infrastructure, longer rotations, deeper operational integration? Does Nigeria leverage American involvement to decisively weaken insurgent groups while retaining full political control? Or does the country gradually become the Sahel's new forward operating platform for global competition? These are not predictions. They are trajectories. And trajectories depend on choices made today. One thing is certain. The violence in northern Nigeria is real. The suffering is real. The need for security reform is undeniable. But the entry of a global superpower into that equation changes the geometry of the conflict. It internationalizes what was primarily domestic. It links local insurgency to global rivalry. It transforms Nigeria from battlefield to chessboard. And on chessboards, the pieces that move are not always the ones making the decisions. So the real question is not simply why American troops are in Nigeria. The real question is this: when global powers compete for influence, resources, and strategic positioning, can Nigeria remain the player, or will it become the prize? Because history shows us something uncomfortable. Nations rich in resources and located in strategic corridors rarely escape global power struggles untouched. The difference between exploitation and empowerment often lies in leadership, transparency, and long-term vision. Nigeria stands at a defining moment. The world is watching. And what happens next will shape not just its security, but its sovereignty for decades to come.